The moment I stepped into the courtroom, I felt every eye on me, piercing, judging, and weighing my worth. I had walked into countless gatherings before, family dinners, weddings, funerals, but nothing had prepared me for this. The air was heavy, stifling, a mixture of anticipation, tension, and unspoken words. The judge's gavel slammed once, commanding silence, but it was my daughter's gaze that struck me hardest. I had watched her grow from a timid child to a young woman with strength I never knew she could carry, but I never imagined her standing there, poised, unwavering, and ready to say what no one in this family dared speak aloud. My heart raced as the opposing counsel shuffled papers, their eyes darting between me and the judge, then to my daughter, calculating, wary, as if expecting a misstep that would ruin everything. I took a seat, gripping my purse tightly, feeling the coarse leather dig into my palms. Memories of my life, the battles I had fought to keep my family afloat, the late nights crying into pillows, the years of hiding my tears behind forced smiles, all of it came rushing back in vivid, painful clarity. Every breath felt heavy, loaded with anticipation, fear, and the tiny spark of hope that somehow today things would shift. The proceedings began slowly, formally, almost methodically, but each word spoken felt like a small stone dropping into a pond, sending waves that rippled through my chest. Arguments were made, documents presented, and yet I hardly heard them. My focus was locked on her. My daughter, who had been so quiet, so observant, so careful in her youth, now held herself with a confidence I had never witnessed. There was a fire in her eyes, a clarity that unsettled the courtroom and made the very air feel alive. I wondered how she learned it, who whispered in her ears, what stories and truths she carried that no one had shared with me before this day. As the opposing counsel made a particularly sharp point, I felt my body tense. I knew the stakes. I knew the history. I knew the betrayal, the heartbreak, the whispered slights, and the years of being underestimated. And then she rose. My daughter, the girl I had once held in my arms while she slept peacefully, now stood in front of everyone, facing not just the judge or the lawyer or the witness, but the weight of our family history. Her voice, clear, steady, and imbued with authority, cut through the room. I felt chills run down my spine. Every word she said seemed measured, deliberate, each syllable carrying the gravity of someone who had carried secrets too long, someone determined to be heard. She spoke about fairness, justice, truth, the very things we had fought over quietly behind closed doors. But then she said something I had never anticipated. Something that made the blood rush from my head, my hands tremble, and my heart lurch violently. Her statement didn't just challenge the other side. It challenged me, my understanding of her, and the very foundation of what I thought I knew about my family. I felt my breath catch, a lump forming in my throat. The courtroom went silent as her words echoed, reverberating off the walls like a hammer striking steel. People gasped quietly, scribbled notes frantically, and some simply stared, mouths slightly open, unable to process the shift that had just occurred. I tried to gather my thoughts, to steady my pulse, but I couldn't. Each beat hammered in my ears like a drum of warning. My daughter had changed the rules of engagement, and suddenly I realized that everything I had assumed, every strategy, every memory, every truth I had clung to, was about to be questioned. I felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Pride because she had found her voice, her courage, and fear because that voice was now wielding power I had never imagined, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. The judge leaned forward, pen poised, clearly intrigued. The lawyers exchanged glances, their professional masks slipping for a brief second, revealing genuine concern. My daughter's calmness unsettled them, a quiet force that made it impossible to ignore her. I swallowed hard, tears prickling my eyes, because for the first time, I understood something profound. The quiet ones, the ones who have watched, learned, and endured, often wield the most devastating power when they finally choose to speak. Her words hung in the air long after she finished speaking. The room seemed suspended in time, caught between disbelief and revelation. I felt my hands unclench, my chest rising and falling in long, deliberate breaths. And then, as she sat down, a subtle smirk on her lips, a knowing gleam in her eyes, I understood. The day was far from over. The battles that had shaped our family, the secrets that had lingered in shadow, were now exposed, and nothing would ever be the same. The gavel banged again, not to conclude but to signify the transition, the turning point. And I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity that the story was just beginning. My daughter had made the first move, But the next steps, the consequences of her revelation were still unknown. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the next moment could change everything, or destroy it. And as I sat there, heart pounding, watching her reclaim power I never thought possible, I felt the weight of the future press against me. Questions swirled. What would the opposing side do next? Would the truth be enough? How far would people go to protect secrets that were meant to stay buried? And most importantly, what would my daughter do now that she had taken the first fearless step? The courtroom seemed to shrink as the day wore on, the walls pressing in with a weight I could almost feel in my chest. My daughter had sat down, her eyes still flashing with defiance, and yet there was a quiet tension that seemed to settle over us like a heavy fog. I could feel every gaze in the room burning into me, assessing, judging, wondering who I was and why I had tolerated so much for so long. I pressed my fingers to my lips, trying to steady my trembling hands, remembering all the years of holding my tongue, of swallowing my own pain so that others wouldn't notice, so that my daughter could grow without the shadows I had lived in. And now she had thrown open the door to everything we had buried, and the echoes of our family secrets filled the space with a suffocating electric energy. The lawyer across from us cleared his throat, attempting to regain control, but even his voice sounded uncertain in the wake of what my daughter had said. He shuffled papers, adjusted his tie, and tried to craft words that could undo the power of her statement, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he hesitated, knowing that for once truth had edged into this room, uninvited but unstoppable. My daughter shifted slightly in her seat, calm and poised, yet every small movement exuded authority, a quiet command that demanded attention. I watched as the judge scribbled notes furiously, leaning forward as though trying to catch every nuance, every inflection, every word that my daughter had spoken, because the courtroom had become a battlefield and she had fired the first shot with devastating precision. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my body taut with anticipation. My mind flashed back to the nights I had lain awake, wondering how we had arrived here, questioning every choice, every compromise, every time I had chosen peace over confrontation. And now all of those moments converged, crashing into me like relentless waves. The fight I thought was only mine had transformed, and suddenly my daughter and I were bound together in a struggle that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had never imagined her standing so tall, speaking with such courage, confronting truths that had remained hidden in shadows for decades. Yet the weight of responsibility was not hers alone. It pressed upon me too, a reminder that we were in this together, navigating a path fraught with danger, deception, and the raw edges of betrayal. The opposing counsel attempted to strike back, his voice rising, carrying sharp accusations, insinuations, and carefully rehearsed logic, but I barely heard the words. My focus remained on her, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the unshakable determination in her eyes, and the subtle tremor in her jaw that betrayed the pressure she carried. She had grown into someone I barely recognized, someone fierce, yet tender, someone capable of wielding words like a weapon but guided by justice and integrity. Every sentence she had spoken earlier had been calculated, but I could sense the emotion beneath, the raw vulnerability that made her argument human, compelling, impossible to dismiss. Hours passed in a blur of motions, arguments, interruptions, and whispered consultations. The courtroom felt suspended in time, caught between reality and anticipation, as if every heart in the room was collectively holding its breath. My daughter had ignited something I couldn't name but could feel pulsing in the air. It was hope, fear, reckoning, and a quiet but insistent demand for acknowledgement. I realized then, in that moment of suspended chaos, that the strength of her voice had already shifted the balance of power. The truth, once hidden, had begun to carve its path, and no one could ignore its presence. A witness was called, someone I had known for years, someone who had once been silent, fearful, but now appeared with an aura of reluctant courage. As they spoke, recounting events, truths, and moments previously shrouded in secrecy, I felt the layers of my past peel away, exposing both wounds and clarity. Memories, once muffled, surged forward in vivid color. The small betrayals, the whispered conversations, the moments where I had been dismissed, undermined, or overlooked. Each revelation hit me like a wave, yet amid the pain, there was a strange sense of liberation, as though the truth finally spoken could not be undone. My daughter listened, her expression unreadable, yet I could see the subtle tightening of her hands, the controlled shifts in her posture, the quiet moments of reflection as she processed every word. It struck me that she was not just observing, she was strategizing, understanding the implications of each statement, each pause, each reaction in the room. The courtroom was alive with tension, with anticipation, and I could feel it coiling in my stomach, a mixture of anxiety and adrenaline. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing against our skins, demanding attention and warning of the consequences that loomed just beyond sight. Then, unexpectedly, the opposing counsel produced a document, a letter, a piece of evidence intended to undermine everything my daughter had claimed. The room's energy shifted, murmurs arose. I held my breath, sensing the dangerous precipice on which we now stood. My daughter's eyes met mine briefly, and in that fleeting glance, I saw a silent reassurance, a promise that she was ready, that we were ready, that we would meet whatever storm this evidence brought with unflinching resolve. And then she rose again, standing taller, her voice clear, steady, and unwavering as she dismantled their claim with precision, intellect, and a depth of understanding that left the courtroom silent, unsure, and unsettled. I could feel tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, not from weakness but from awe, from recognition, from the profound realization that the child I had raised had become a force of nature. Each word she spoke was laden with weight, each gesture purposeful, each pause deliberate. I watched as the opposition faltered, as the judge leaned forward, as the jury shifted uneasily in their seats. My daughter had seized control, not through intimidation, but through the quiet, relentless power of truth, courage, and integrity. As the day drew on, the sun shifted outside the tall windows, casting long, golden shadows across the courtroom. The atmosphere thickened with suspense, as though the walls themselves held their breath, waiting to see what would come next. And then, as the final witness left the stand and the courtroom settled into a tense silence, my daughter leaned slightly forward, her eyes scanning the room, her expression unreadable. She had achieved something extraordinary, yet I knew instinctively that the story was far from over. The next words, the next move, would determine not just the outcome of this case, but the trajectory of our family, the exposure of long-held secrets, and the revelation of truths that could never be silenced again. I sat back, letting the weight of the day press into me, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and fear. I understood now more than ever that the quiet ones, the ones who had endured, who had watched and learned in silence, could unleash a force that was unstoppable once they chose to speak. My daughter had done that today. She had chosen to speak, to confront, to challenge, to expose. And as I watched her sit down, the faintest smirk of satisfaction on her lips, I realized that the storm was only beginning, and we were standing at the eye of it, unshaken, determined, and ready for whatever came next. And then the clerk called the next motion, the judge adjusted his papers, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Something was about to happen. Something that would push every secret, every betrayal, every hidden truth into the open. And in that moment, I understood with a bone-deep certainty that the next few minutes could change everything. My daughter had made her stand. Now the consequences would follow, and I had no idea who would survive the fallout, who would be exposed, or what truths would leave the courtroom forever altered. The courtroom had grown quieter now, the tension settling like dust in a room left undisturbed for too long. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest echoing in my ears as I watched my daughter, seated but alert, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her jaw set with unwavering determination. The opposing counsel had begun to adjust, attempting to regain control, yet even he seemed uncertain, as if he were measuring each word against the weight of her presence, knowing that the strength she projected could not be easily dismantled. Every movement she made, every slight shift of her shoulders or tilt of her head, communicated power, a quiet authority that belied her years, that spoke volumes about her understanding of the family history, of the betrayals we had endured, of the secrets that had long remained buried. I found myself recalling the nights when she had been small, when she had clutched my hand and whispered fears into my ear, a mirror of the anxieties that had lived inside me for so long. Those fears had been replaced by courage, fierce and unflinching, yet tempered with wisdom beyond her years. I watched her now, feeling a mixture of awe and trepidation, knowing that the voice I had nurtured, the lessons I had instilled, were now being wielded in a way that neither of us had ever imagined. She had learned the art of timing, of speaking not merely to be heard but to leave an indelible mark on every soul present in the room. The judge, the jury, even the gallery seemed suspended in a state of attentive silence, each person aware that what unfolded here could redefine every understanding they had of our family and its hidden fractures. A witness was called, someone I had known for decades, someone who had remained loyal to our family yet had witnessed the subtle, corrosive tensions that had built over the years. As they spoke, I felt each word pierce through me, conjuring memories I had tried to forget. The whispered criticisms behind closed doors, the nights of forced smiles, the moments when I had questioned my worth, my purpose, my place in a family that seemed to demand perfection while tolerating deceit. The witness spoke carefully, recounting incidents, timelines, and exchanges that painted a clearer, albeit painful, picture of the events that had led us to this courtroom. My daughter listened intently, her expression unreadable but her eyes flicking with comprehension, her mind cataloging every detail, measuring every nuance. I realized then that she was not just participating in this trial. She was orchestrating it, absorbing the subtle dynamics, understanding the ways in which every lie, every omission, could be leveraged to reveal the truth. The opposing counsel attempted to intervene, presenting a document, a letter, a record intended to challenge the witness's credibility, yet my daughter's presence rendered their efforts almost impotent. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp, her posture commanding, and spoke with a calm precision that made even the seasoned professionals pause. Her voice, steady yet imbued with emotion, dismantled the argument, exposing inconsistencies, and highlighting the unspoken truths that had long been ignored. I felt a surge of pride, tempered by the weight of responsibility, knowing that every word she uttered could escalate the tension, could ignite the hidden fires within this room, could bring to light more than anyone was prepared to confront. I thought of all the times I had wondered if she would ever find her voice, if she would ever confront the injustices and betrayals that had shaped our family. And now, seeing her here wielding words like a finely honed instrument, I understood that she had found it, not just for herself but for the legacy of every suppressed truth, every whispered grievance, every quiet pain we had endured. Each statement she made was deliberate, each pause intentional, and every movement communicated authority. She was no longer the child who had once clung to my side. She was a force capable of shaping outcomes, of demanding accountability, and of forcing recognition from those who had once believed their power unassailable. As the afternoon wore on, the proceedings took on an almost theatrical rhythm, punctuated by interjections, objections, and the occasional sharp intake of breath from the gallery. I could feel my own tension rising, a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and a strange exhilaration, knowing that we were threading a delicate needle between revelation and upheaval. My daughter's voice, unwavering, carried through the room like a steady flame, illuminating the shadows, exposing the vulnerabilities, and forcing a reckoning that could not be ignored. Every reaction from the opposing side, every note scribbled by the court reporter, every subtle glance exchanged among the spectators seemed magnified, a testament to the weight of the truth she carried and the precision with which she delivered it. And then, just as I began to think we were gaining momentum, the opposing counsel introduced a surprise witness, a person whose presence I had not anticipated, someone who could unravel our carefully laid foundation. The courtroom shifted immediately. Murmurs rippled through the audience, and I felt my stomach tighten as the air thickened with uncertainty. The witness approached the stand, their expression inscrutable, their presence commanding attention. My daughter rose slightly in her seat, her eyes narrowing, her body poised, yet there was a subtle flicker of unease that betrayed the recognition of the challenge ahead. I felt my own pulse quicken, knowing that the next moments could pivot the trajectory of the case, that every word exchanged could tip the balance in favor of revelation or deception. The witness began to speak, their voice measured, calm, yet layered with a weight that demanded careful attention. They recounted events that seemed innocuous at first but gradually wove together a tapestry of hidden motives, overlooked details, and subtle manipulations. My daughter's gaze sharpened, her mind clearly racing as she absorbed every nuance, every implication. I could feel the tension coiling in my chest, a taut wire stretching toward its breaking point, as the courtroom collectively leaned in, awaiting the inevitable clash between truth and deception. With a quiet, deliberate motion, my daughter rose to respond. Her voice, controlled yet resonant, cut through the tension, dissecting the witness's narrative with surgical precision. She exposed contradictions, highlighted omissions, and revealed truths that had remained invisible until now. The judge leaned forward, clearly intrigued, while the opposing counsel's confidence wavered, his previous dominance undermined by her steadfast clarity. And in that moment, I understood with profound certainty that the tide had shifted irrevocably. My daughter's courage, intellect, and resolve had transformed the courtroom into a stage where truth would no longer be silenced. Yet as the echoes of her words faded, I sensed a subtle but dangerous undercurrent. There were forces in this room, hidden, calculating, and patient, who would not allow the exposure of long-buried secrets without resistance. I felt the shadows of our past stirring, threatening to surge forward, reminding me that the path to justice was rarely linear or safe. My daughter had made her stand, but the consequences, the ripples of her actions, were only beginning to unfold. And as the clerk called the next motion and the judge adjusted his notes, I realized with a sharp intake of breath that the true test of courage, resilience, and ingenuity was still to come. I glanced at her briefly, catching the faintest spark of anticipation in her eyes. She had prepared for this moment, yet even she could not foresee every twist, every deception, every revelation that awaited us. The room felt alive, charged with tension, anticipation, and the promise of dramatic upheaval. And I understood then, with a mixture of dread and awe, that the next statement, the next action could change everything, could expose truths that might shatter the family we had known, or provide vindication for the courage she had summoned. My heart raced with the realization that the story, the battle, and the revelation were far from over, and that the next move would demand everything we had: intelligence, patience, and unwavering courage. And then, in the silence between the proceedings, I felt it. The moment before a storm, the brief, pregnant pause where anticipation hangs thick, waiting for release. The courtroom held its collective breath, the next exchange poised to tip the scales, and I knew without doubt that what came next would not only define the outcome of this case, but reshape the very fabric of our family, and the truths we had long tried to bury. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, a dense fog that seemed to press down on my shoulders, making every breath feel deliberate, every heartbeat echoing in my ears like a warning drum. My daughter sat poised, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Every subtle movement, every fleeting glance, seemed to command attention, as if she were silently orchestrating the ebb and flow of energy in the room. I could feel the weight of her presence, the gravity of her words from earlier, and the lingering shockwaves they had sent through the gallery. The opposing counsel, once so confident, now fidgeted in his seat, his voice occasionally faltering, betraying the cracks in his composure. I swallowed hard, my fingers clenching the edge of my purse as I watched, amazed at the force my daughter had become, my quiet, observant child, now a master of strategy and truth. The witness on the stand continued their account, recounting details I had once considered irrelevant, now illuminated with a clarity that was almost painful. Each revelation brought a flood of memories crashing through me. Whispered accusations in hallways, moments of betrayal masked with polite smiles, the countless times I had questioned my judgment, my role, my worth in a family that seemed incapable of recognizing my efforts or valuing my voice. My daughter leaned forward slightly, her lips pressed together in concentration, eyes flicking to the judge, to the opposing counsel, and back to the witness. I felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed me, tempered by the knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Every word spoken, every pause, every subtle inflection had consequences, and the path we were walking was narrow and perilous. The opposing counsel attempted to redirect the narrative, producing a series of documents meant to contradict the witness's account. There was a sharp intake of breath from several people in the gallery as papers rustled and pens scratched across legal pads. My pulse quickened as I sensed the delicate balance teetering, the line between victory and chaos narrowing with each passing moment. But my daughter was unshaken. Her calm demeanor, her unwavering focus, conveyed a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the room, undermining their efforts without a single raised voice. I realized then that she had inherited more than just my resolve. She had a keen intellect, an instinctive understanding of human behavior, and a fearlessness that had been honed through years of observation. She was ready for this, more ready than I had ever been, and perhaps more ready than anyone else in the room could comprehend. As the witness concluded, the judge leaned forward, pen poised, absorbing every detail, and my daughter stood. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Her voice was calm, steady, yet carried an undeniable force that filled every corner of the room. She challenged the inconsistencies in the opposing counsel's narrative, highlighting omissions, contradictions, and subtle manipulations. Her words were precise, measured, yet imbued with emotion, pain, courage, and an insistence on truth. I felt a lump rise in my throat as I realized the impact of what she was doing. She was dismantling the carefully constructed facade of deception, piece by piece, with a meticulousness that left no room for doubt or dismissal. The opposing counsel struggled to respond, his confidence faltering as he tried to find footing in the shifting terrain she had created. I noticed the tension in his jaw, the tightening of his hands, and the way his voice wavered despite his attempts at composure. The gallery murmured quietly, astonished by her poise and clarity, and I could see several spectators leaning forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. It struck me that the quiet ones, those who had endured, observed, and learned in silence, often held the power to upend expectations in ways that no one anticipated. My daughter, once a shy, cautious child, was now the embodiment of that truth. Minutes stretched into hours as she continued, navigating questions, presenting arguments, and addressing the subtle implications of every statement made by the opposing side. Her strategic brilliance was evident in the way she anticipated challenges, countered objections, and reinforced her points with unwavering conviction. I felt both exhilaration and fear, knowing that every word carried immense weight and that the final outcome hinged on her ability to maintain this balance. Memories of my own struggles, of long nights spent strategizing, of sacrifices made, of words left unspoken, surfaced, and I marveled at how she had absorbed these lessons, transforming them into a formidable presence that could command attention and respect. Then unexpectedly a new witness was called, someone whose involvement I had not foreseen. The room shifted instantly, a subtle tension rippling through the air as all eyes turned to this individual. Their presence was commanding, their gaze sharp, and I sensed the potential for disruption, for a twist that could change the trajectory of the proceedings. My daughter's expression did not falter. She remained calm, yet I could see a glimmer of calculation in her eyes as she assessed the implications, anticipating the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of anxiety and anticipation, knowing that this new element could tip the delicate balance we had fought so hard to establish. The witness began to speak, their voice steady, measured, yet laden with implications that demanded careful attention. They recounted events with precision, highlighting connections and revealing subtleties that had previously remained hidden. I felt a shiver run through me as I realized the magnitude of what was being revealed. The threads of our family history, the hidden tensions, the carefully concealed secrets, all converging in this moment, exposing truths that could no longer be ignored. My daughter listened intently, her mind clearly racing, processing each word, anticipating the impact, and preparing her response. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric, charged with the anticipation of revelation and the fear of consequences. As the witness concluded, my daughter rose once more, her voice carrying through the room with unwavering authority. She addressed every point, countered every assertion, and illuminated the gaps in the narrative with a precision that left the courtroom stunned. The judge leaned forward, clearly captivated, and the opposing counsel's composure seemed to crumble under the weight of her argument. I felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. Her brilliance and courage were undeniable, but the tension in the room reminded me that the path forward remained uncertain, fraught with challenges that we could neither predict nor control. The sun had shifted in the sky outside the tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the courtroom floor. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on everyone present. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the sense that the next moments could alter the course of not only this case but the trajectory of our family. My daughter had made her stand, had exposed truths long hidden, had challenged deception with courage and clarity. Yet I knew instinctively that the story was far from over, that the consequences of these revelations would unfold in ways we could not yet comprehend. And then, as the clerk prepared to call the next motion, I felt the tension spike, a silent warning that the next exchange, the next statement, could change everything. I glanced at my daughter, noting the subtle gleam of determination in her eyes, the calm that belied the storm we were about to face. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, poised on the edge of revelation, and I understood with a bone-deep certainty that what came next would test our courage, resilience, and the very limits of our resolve. The moment had arrived, the next chapter of our struggle unfolding, and I braced myself for the truth that was about to emerge. The courtroom was still when the clerk announced the next witness, but I could feel the energy shift instantly, an invisible charge that seemed to ripple through the air and coil around my spine. My daughter remained seated, poised yet alert, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her eyes scanning every detail, every subtle movement, every nuance in the room. I could see the weight of responsibility etched into her features, the quiet intensity that had grown in her over the years, shaped by moments of observation, endurance, and resilience. My heart thumped hard in my chest, each beat a stark reminder of how far we had come and how fragile the balance now felt. This witness, I could tell instantly, was not merely another person to be examined. Their presence held the potential to unravel or confirm everything we had fought to reveal so far. As the witness approached the stand, their expression calm yet authoritative, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The room seemed to contract, every whisper, shuffle, and cough magnified in the stillness, every eye trained on the unfolding drama. My daughter leaned slightly forward, her chin lifted, her gaze unwavering, a subtle but unmistakable sign that she was ready for whatever came next. The witness began to speak, their voice measured, deliberate, each word heavy with implication. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but the tension coiled tighter with each passing second, memories of the years spent hiding, enduring, and observing flooding my mind. Every betrayal, every dismissal, every moment of being underestimated surged back, and I realized with sudden clarity that this trial was not only about legal truths but about reclaiming dignity, voice, and justice for all the times we had been ignored. As the witness recounted events, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Their statements were precise, but layered with suggestion, hinting at deeper truths that had long remained hidden. My daughter listened intently, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, her lips pressed together, and I could sense the wheels turning in her mind. She had always had a keen sense for reading people, for understanding what lay beneath the words they chose, and now in this high-stakes environment, that skill was sharper than ever. The opposing counsel fidgeted in his seat, adjusting his tie, shuffling papers, trying to craft questions that might unsettle the witness, but even his efforts seemed muted against the undeniable force of what was being revealed. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mixture of pride, fear, and awe, knowing that my daughter's quiet determination and unwavering courage had transformed this trial into something far more potent than any of us could have imagined. Hours seemed to pass in a blur, the rhythm of questions and answers flowing like waves that ebbed and surged, each exchange pulling us deeper into a web of revelation. I could feel my pulse quicken as secrets long buried began to surface, some obvious, others subtle, but all carrying the weight of consequence. The witness's testimony began to expose the cracks in the opposing side's narrative, highlighting inconsistencies and contradictions that had previously been overlooked or ignored. My daughter absorbed it all with meticulous precision, each subtle flick of her eyes, each measured breath, each gentle tilt of her head a signal that she was cataloging, analyzing, preparing. I realized then that the courtroom was no longer merely a stage for legal proceedings. It had become a battlefield where truth and deception danced in a delicate, tense choreography, and my daughter was leading the charge. Suddenly, the opposing counsel made a move I hadn't anticipated, introducing a document that appeared to contradict critical points in the witness's account. The room reacted immediately. A hush fell over the gallery, pens paused mid-note, and the judge leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the coil of anxiety that reminded me how precarious the moment was. My daughter's gaze flicked to the document, then to the witness, and finally to me. I saw a flicker of recognition, a subtle nod, and I knew she had anticipated this move, that her response was ready, calculated, and precise. Her calm demeanor belied the intensity of her mind at work, navigating this new challenge with the skill of someone who had not only endured hardship but had transformed it into understanding and strength. She rose, and the courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, sensing that the next words would carry extraordinary weight. Her voice, steady yet imbued with quiet authority, cut through the tension like a scalpel, dissecting every point, exposing every subtle flaw, and weaving a narrative that rendered the document almost irrelevant. I felt my chest tighten with pride, my eyes welling with tears I refused to release, because I realized that this moment, this precise moment, was the culmination of years of resilience, courage, and observation. My daughter had not only reclaimed her voice, she had amplified it, projecting it in a way that demanded recognition, respect, and truth. The witness nodded subtly as she spoke, reinforcing the points she made with corroboration, while the opposing counsel fumbled, attempting to regain his footing. The gallery murmured in astonishment, several people shifting in their seats, captivated by the unfolding drama. I understood with deep clarity that the quiet ones, the observers, the endurance bearers, often wield the most profound power when they choose to act, when they finally speak, when they assert themselves with courage and precision. My daughter embodied this truth, and the weight of it filled the room with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Time blurred as the proceedings continued, each exchange more intense than the last, the courtroom charged with anticipation and uncertainty. Every statement, every revelation, every subtle reaction carried potential consequences, and I could feel the threads of family history stretching taut, ready to snap or bind us closer together. I thought of the years we had endured, the silences we had navigated, the betrayals that had shaped us, and I marveled at how she had absorbed it all, transforming pain into strategy, observation into action, and endurance into unstoppable resolve. And then, as the witness concluded and the judge prepared to call the next motion, I sensed a subtle but dangerous shift in the room, a current of tension that suggested the next revelation, the next disclosure, could change everything. My daughter's eyes met mine briefly, a silent promise that she was ready, that we were ready, that the storm we had weathered was far from over. The courtroom seemed suspended, poised on the edge of a decision, a revelation, a truth that could not be ignored. I felt the weight of the moment press against my chest, the anticipation coiling like a spring, knowing that what was about to occur would define not just the outcome of this case, but the course of our family, our understanding, and our lives moving forward. And in that tense, suspended moment, I realized with profound clarity that the next few minutes could either vindicate us or shatter us, expose truths or entangle us in deeper secrets, and that my daughter, my brave, brilliant, unyielding daughter, was the only one prepared to face whatever storm was coming with courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The next step was coming, inevitable and unstoppable, and I could only brace myself, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after this day. The air in the courtroom was thick with expectation, a heavy, almost tangible weight pressing down on every soul present. My daughter had risen from her seat with a quiet determination that silenced the murmurs, commanding attention not with volume but with an intensity that demanded recognition. Every eye in the room seemed to fix on her, every heartbeat synchronizing with the tension that hummed between walls and polished benches. I could feel my own chest tighten as I watched her, remembering the countless nights when she had confided in me her fears, her doubts, her questions about a family torn by secrets, betrayals, and unspoken grievances. Those fears had transformed into something formidable, a courage that now radiated from her, palpable and undeniable. The opposing counsel, who had once seemed so composed, now shifted uneasily, papers trembling in his hands, his carefully rehearsed arguments dissolving under the quiet but undeniable force of her presence. I remembered the years we had spent maneuvering through whispered criticisms and subtle undermining, the nights I had lain awake wondering if I was invisible, if my voice mattered, if my efforts to shield my daughter from the cruelty and neglect we had endured had been enough. And yet here she was, embodying every lesson, every word of encouragement, every ounce of resilience I had tried to instill. She moved through the room like a tide, gentle yet unstoppable, her gaze steady, her mind clear, her heart resolved. When she began to speak, her voice was calm, deliberate, and imbued with a weight that made silence necessary. Every word carried purpose, every pause was measured, and every glance seemed to carve space for truth to settle firmly in the consciousness of everyone listening. The witness who had been called, the final piece of the puzzle, stood nervously at the podium, their presence both commanding and precarious. Their testimony, I knew, would either cement the truths we had been building or attempt to unravel them with calculated precision. My daughter approached the challenge with a poise that was breathtaking, navigating each assertion, countering each implication, and revealing the subtleties that had long been ignored. I could feel the collective tension in the courtroom rising, a coiling energy that seemed ready to snap, And yet my daughter's presence anchored it, transforming chaos into clarity, fear into focus. As the witness spoke, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, memories flooding in like relentless tides, moments when we had been dismissed, belittled, or forced to bend to the whims of a family that had never truly seen us. My daughter's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, but her eyes were unflinching, scanning every reaction, reading every nuance. She had grown into someone who could wield words like weapons or shields, who could command attention without raising her voice, who could expose truth with a subtle glance or a carefully chosen phrase. I marveled at her, my chest tightening with pride and fear alike, knowing that what she was about to do could either redeem us or provoke deeper, unforeseen challenges. The opposing counsel attempted one last maneuver, producing documents and testimony designed to discredit the witness and cast doubt on our narrative. The room seemed to hold its breath, the anticipation almost suffocating. I watched as my daughter tilted her head slightly, a subtle movement that indicated both assessment and preparation. Her voice then rose, steady, unyielding, precise, dissecting the opposing arguments with surgical clarity. She highlighted contradictions, drew connections that had previously gone unnoticed, and revealed truths that could not be denied. The gallery shifted uneasily, some leaning forward in awe, others exchanging glances of disbelief, as the weight of her words sank in. The judge, too, appeared captivated, pen poised, absorbing every syllable with keen attention, while the opposing counsel's confidence unraveled, leaving only a faint echo of his previous authority. I felt tears prick at my eyes as I observed the culmination of years of endurance, resilience, and silent struggle. My daughter had transformed our shared pain into a force so formidable that it could no longer be ignored or suppressed. Every whispered criticism, every overlooked effort, every silent moment of endurance had coalesced into this singular point of clarity, this assertion of dignity and truth. And yet, even as relief began to stir in my chest, I knew instinctively that the conclusion was not about a single victory, a single declaration, or a single statement. It was about the recognition of a legacy, the acknowledgement of truths long denied, and the establishment of a voice that could no longer be silenced. The witness concluded their testimony, and a hush fell over the courtroom. Time seemed to stretch, each second drawn out with a weight that made it impossible to ignore the gravity of the moment. My daughter remained standing, poised, her eyes sweeping over the room, reading the faces of those present, weighing their reactions and sensing the subtle shifts in energy. The opposing counsel's shoulders sagged, a silent admission of defeat that required no words, and I felt a surge of cautious triumph, tempered by the knowledge that the true impact of this day would unfold slowly, in layers and echoes beyond the courtroom walls. And then, in that quiet, suspended moment, a small but significant gesture drew my attention. A subtle exchange, barely perceptible, between two members of the family whose presence had loomed over us for years. Their eyes met, and in that instant, I sensed the stirrings of change, the ripple of consequences that would extend far beyond the confines of this room. My daughter's expression softened just slightly, a hint of a knowing smile, as if acknowledging the weight of what had been achieved and the journey still ahead. The gallery seemed to exhale collectively, a release of tension that had built over hours, yet the silence was pregnant with anticipation, a reminder that the resolution of the past did not erase the complexities of the future. I realized then, with a clarity that was both humbling and empowering, that this day was not only about the courtroom, the testimony, or the documents. It was about reclaiming our narrative, asserting our dignity, and affirming that truth, courage, and resilience could prevail even in the face of long-standing oppression and betrayal. My daughter had not only proven her voice but had illuminated a path for all of us, a reminder that endurance and courage, when combined with wisdom and strategy, could shift the course of events in ways previously unimaginable. As the judge prepared to deliver the final statement, I felt a deep, resonant calm settle over me, a sense of completion tinged with anticipation for the consequences that would inevitably follow. My daughter turned slightly, her eyes meeting mine, and in that gaze I saw recognition, gratitude, and the quiet affirmation of a bond forged through struggle and tempered by love. The courtroom, now silent except for the soft shuffle of papers, seemed to hold its collective breath one last time, as if aware that the story unfolding here would ripple outward, leaving a lasting impression on every heart present. And then, as the final words were pronounced, I felt the stirrings of something both familiar and transformative, The knowledge that we had faced the storm, that we had spoken our truths, that we had survived, and that the echoes of this day would reverberate far beyond the walls of this room. My daughter's hand brushed against mine, a subtle but powerful gesture, and I understood that this was both an ending and a beginning. The chapter of struggle had reached its resolution, yet the legacy of courage, truth, and resilience was only beginning to unfold. The tension eased, but the curiosity, the questions, the reflections, and the possibilities remained, lingering in the air like a promise. The courtroom emptied slowly, people whispering, glancing back, absorbing what had occurred, yet none could fully capture the depth of the journey we had traversed. My daughter and I walked out together, side by side, feeling the weight of our shared experience, the strength of our bond, and the certainty that we had faced something profound, transformative, and irreversibly defining. And as we stepped into the sunlight, the warmth of the day felt like a balm on old wounds, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, clarity, courage, and truth could prevail. The streets beyond the courthouse were alive with movement, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing as if unaware of the monumental shifts that had taken place within those walls. And yet I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same. My daughter had found her voice, I had reclaimed mine, and together we had faced the echoes of the past with courage, clarity, and determination. The story of our family, our struggles, and our triumphs would resonate far beyond this day, a testament to the resilience of those who endure, the power of truth, and the strength of a bond forged through shared hardship and unwavering love. As we walked down the steps, I felt a quiet smile tug at my lips. The journey had been long, painful, and unpredictable, yet the outcome was more than I could have hoped for. My daughter had not only stood in my stead but had illuminated a path forward, proving that courage, intelligence, and heart could overcome even the deepest wounds. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the city, I felt a profound sense of closure, tempered with the excitement of all that lay ahead. The weight of the past was lifted, yet the curiosity of the future beckoned, a gentle, persistent reminder that life, with all its complexities, surprises, and revelations, would continue to unfold in ways we could not yet imagine. Please follow me for no reason.